The woman discovered that the stray cat was acting strangely with the baby monkey. The truth that followed surprised everyone. What secret could a stray cat be hiding in a quiet suburban backyard? When Sarah investigated strange cries near the neighboring wildlife sanctuary, she found the local orange stray cat acting protective over a tiny lost baby monkey. But the truly shocking twist wasn't just the cat's bravery. It was the surprising truth the rescuers revealed about the cat's hidden past and his connection to the monkey's family. Like, subscribe, and listen now to uncover the full story of Cheeto the guardian cat and the astonishing bond that surprised everyone. The sound was utterly wrong. Not the familiar chatter of squirrels squabbling over acorns, nor the scolding calls of blue jays mobbing the bird feeder, nor even the occasional distant bark from a neighbor's dog. This was a high-pitched, frantic chittering, punctuated by thin, plaintive cries that scraped against the otherwise peaceful, late-afternoon air. It seemed to emanate from the dense tangle of overgrown bushes and ivy that marked the boundary between Sarah's meticulously kept backyard and the wilder, wooded edge of the adjacent property, the Willow Creek Wildlife Rescue and Sanctuary. Sarah paused, pruning shears halfway to a languishing rosebush, her head tilted. She'd lived here, in this quiet house nestled against the sanctuary's edge, for nearly 15 years, long enough to become accustomed to the occasional exotic squawk or hoot drifting over the fence. But this sound was different. It was small, desperate, and distressingly close. Curiosity piqued, mingled with a faint unease. She laid her shears in the bird bath and walked across the cool grass toward the back fence. As she neared the overgrown corner, another sound joined the chittering, a low, soft meow, repeated rhythmically. It wasn't the demanding meow of a hungry pet, nor the aggressive yowl of a territorial dispute. It sounded questioning, concerned. She recognized the source, or thought she did. It sounded like Rusty, the elusive orange tabby stray who occasionally ghosted through her garden, always vanishing like smoke if she so much as opened the back door. But why would he be meowing like that? And at what? She moved closer, parting the low-hanging branches of an old lilac bush. And then she saw him. Rusty was there, but he wasn't behaving like the wary phantom she knew. He paced back and forth in a small, tight semicircle just before a particularly dense patch of ivy, his tail twitching nervously. He'd stop, emit that soft, questioning meow towards the ivy, then glance around quickly, his green eyes wide and alert, before resuming his anxious patrol. He seemed completely oblivious to her presence, utterly consumed by whatever drama was unfolding in the undergrowth. What could possibly hold the attention of such a skittish creature so intensely? What was he guarding or fretting over? The strange, high-pitched cries from the ivy continued, weaker now, almost heartbreakingly frail. Sarah held her breath, a sense of profound mystery settling over her quiet garden. Something highly unusual was happening, and the neighborhood's aloof stray cat was inexplicably at the very center of it. She crept forward another step, needing to see what secret the ivy held, her heart beginning to beat a little faster with apprehension and intrigue. Sarah Albright, a recently retired middle school librarian in her early 60s, cherished the peace and predictability of her life. Her small bungalow filled with books and the lingering scent of lemon polish was her sanctuary, especially since her husband Tom had passed away 5 years ago. Her children were grown, living lives of their own in distant cities, leaving Sarah with ample time for her passions, reading, tending her vibrant flower garden, and observing the quiet comings and goings of the local wildlife drawn to her bird feeders and the sanctuary next door. The Willow Creek Wildlife Rescue and Sanctuary wasn't a major zoo, but rather a smaller non-profit operation dedicated to rehabilitating injured native wildlife and providing a home for exotic animals rescued from unfortunate situations, confiscated pets, retired circus performers, zoo overflows. It was generally a quiet neighbor, the sounds usually muffled by the thick buffer of trees and brush along the property line, but its presence added a unique, slightly exotic flavor to Sarah's otherwise typical suburban existence. One constant, if fleeting, element of her backyard view was the orange stray cat she'd nicknamed Rusty. He was a creature of habit and shadow, appearing most often at dawn or dusk, a flash of faded ginger fur against the green lawn before melting back into the undergrowth. He was thin but wiry, bearing the subtle scars of a life lived on the edges, a small nick in his left ear, a faint white line on his nose. He never begged, never approached, never lingered. Sarah, respecting his apparent desire for independence, simply observed him from her kitchen window, occasionally feeling a pang of sympathy for his solitary existence, but making no effort to tame him. He was just part of the local fauna, wild and self-sufficient. That's why his behavior this afternoon was so jarringly out of character. The anxious pacing, the soft, almost pleading meows, the intense focus, it was completely unlike the aloof ghost she was used to. Drawn by an irresistible curiosity, she moved closer to the ivy patch, her footsteps silent on the soft earth. Rusty glanced at her, a brief flicker of his usual wariness in his green eyes, but he didn't bolt. His attention immediately snapped back to the source of the whimpering cries within the leaves. Sarah crouched down, carefully parting the thick ivy vines, her breath caught in her throat. Huddled at the base of the tangled stems, shivering despite the mild afternoon, was the source of the strange cries. A tiny creature, no bigger than her hand, covered in soft, brownish-gray fur, with delicate black hands and feet and enormous dark eyes that stared up at her in sheer terror. It was a baby monkey, possibly a tamarin or marmoset, species she vaguely recognized from a documentary or a past visit to a larger zoo. It looked impossibly small, fragile, and utterly alone. "Oh my goodness," Sarah whispered again, this time in pure astonishment. A monkey, a baby monkey, right here in her garden. It must have come from the sanctuary, somehow gotten out. But the shock of seeing the tiny primate was immediately compounded by the actions of the cat. Rusty hadn't retreated. He stood close by, watching Sarah intently, then looked back at the shivering monkey and let out another soft, questioning meow. He took a tentative step towards the monkey and gently, incredibly gently, nudged its small shoulder with his nose. The monkey flinched but didn't try to run. This wasn't the behavior of a predator sizing up prey. It looked impossibly like concern, like protection. The sheer unlikeliness of it, a hardened stray cat seemingly attempting to comfort or guard a lost baby monkey, struck Sarah with profound force. This was the inciting incident, the moment that shattered her understanding of the natural order in her own backyard. She couldn't simply stand by. She couldn't just assume things would sort themselves out. The sight of the vulnerable monkey and the stray cat's bafflingly gentle behavior compelled her to act, to understand, and somehow to help. Her quiet afternoon had just become extraordinary. Sarah remained crouched by the ivy, mesmerized and perplexed. The baby monkey huddled deeper into the leaves, its tiny body still trembling. Rusty continued his strange vigil, alternating between soft meows directed at the monkey and anxious glances towards the surrounding woods and sky. What was going through the cat's mind? Was it confusion, a misplaced maternal instinct, or something else entirely? Sarah had read about unusual animal friendships, seen heartwarming videos online, but witnessing such a scene firsthand, involving the aloof stray she barely knew, felt surreal. She slowly extended a hand, speaking softly, "It's okay, little one. It's okay, Rusty." The monkey flinched violently at her movement and let out a sharp cry. Rusty immediately tensed, placing his body slightly more between Sarah and the monkey, a low rumble starting in his chest. Sarah froze, withdrawing her hand. Okay, direct intervention wasn't the right approach, not yet. The monkey was terrified, and Rusty, despite his apparent concern for the primate, was clearly still wary of her and protective of his charge. She needed to think. The monkey obviously belonged to the sanctuary. It needed to be returned, cared for by experts. Leaving it here was not an option. It was far too small and vulnerable. But how to proceed? If she tried to catch the monkey herself, she might injure it or cause it extreme stress. And Rusty's reaction suggested he might try to interfere, perhaps even scratch or bite in his protective state. Trying to shoo Rusty away seemed cruel and counterproductive, especially if he was genuinely trying to help. As she debated her options, a sudden shadow flickered across the grass. Sarah looked up instinctively. Circling high overhead, riding the thermal currents, was a large hawk. Its keen eyes would undoubtedly be scanning the ground below for any sign of prey. At the same moment, Rusty's demeanor changed dramatically. He flattened his ears, his body tensed, and he let out a sharp, menacing hiss directly toward the sky. He shifted his position again, crouching lower, trying to shield the tiny monkey more effectively with his own body. The baby monkey, perhaps sensing the shift in the cat's posture or hearing the hiss, whimpered again and tried to burrow even deeper under the ivy. The hawk circled once more, then drifted away over the trees, perhaps not having spotted the potential meal hidden below. But the incident clarified everything for Sarah. Rusty's protective behavior wasn't just a strange fluke, it was a response to real present danger. He was guarding the monkey. The vulnerability of the tiny creature, coupled with the cat's astonishing defense, solidified Sarah's resolve. She had to get help from the sanctuary. She backed away slowly, carefully, trying not to make any sudden movements that might alarm Rusty further. Once she reached the patio, she pulled out her cell phone, her fingers slightly clumsy with adrenaline. She found the number for Willow Creek Sanctuary stored in her contacts. She'd added it years ago after finding an injured owl in her yard. She dialed, her heart pounding. A young, cheerful voice answered, "Willow Creek Sanctuary, this is Ben speaking." Sarah took a breath. "Hello, Ben. My name is Sarah Albright. I live next door to the sanctuary on Willow Lane." "Oh, yes, Mrs. Albright. How can I help you?" "Something very unusual has happened. I think one of your monkeys is in my backyard." a very small one, a baby. There was a pause on the other end. "A monkey, ma'am? Are you sure? All our primates were accounted for this morning." Ben sounded polite but skeptical. "I'm quite sure," Sarah insisted, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's tiny, brown and gray, hiding in the ivy near my back fence. And the strangest thing, our local stray cat, an orange tabby, seems to be guarding it. He just chased off a hawk, I think." Another pause, longer this time. "An orange cat? Guarding it?" Ben sounded bewildered. "Okay, Mrs. Albright, that does sound unusual. Let me check with Dave, our senior keeper. Can you stay where you are? We'll send someone over immediately to check it out. Please don't try to approach the monkey yourself." "I won't," Sarah promised. "I'll wait on my patio." She hung up, her mind racing. Waiting felt agonizing. Every rustle of leaves from the woods beyond the fence made her jump. She kept her eyes fixed on the ivy patch. Rusty had settled down slightly after the hawk incident, but remained vigilant, pacing his small semicircle, occasionally pausing to look intently into the bushes. He seemed committed to his self-appointed duty. Sarah felt a growing sense of admiration for the scruffy stray. Who knew what instincts drove him, but his actions spoke volumes. The stakes felt incredibly high. The survival of the tiny lost monkey seemed to rest, for now, on the unlikely shoulders of a stray cat and a retired librarian waiting anxiously for help to arrive. The wait stretched, each minute feeling like 10. Sarah paced her small patio, torn between wanting to get closer to monitor the situation and respecting the sanctuary's instruction to keep her distance. She could still hear the occasional faint whimper from the ivy, and Rusty remained a steadfast, if anxious, sentinel nearby. His presence was strangely comforting now. Knowing he was there, actively protecting the little monkey, eased Sarah's sense of helplessness. Finally, she heard voices approaching from the side gate that connected her property to a service path for the sanctuary, a courtesy agreed upon years ago for emergency access. Two figures emerged, a young man in a khaki uniform shirt with a Willow Creek logo, presumably Ben, who she'd spoken to on the phone, and an older man, weathered and calm-looking, with kind eyes and graying hair tucked under a worn cap. This must be Dave, the senior keeper. "Mrs. Albright?" Dave called out softly, his voice gentle but carrying authority. "Ben said you found something unusual." "Yes, over here," Sarah whispered, gesturing towards the back fence. "The baby monkey is in that patch of ivy, and the orange cat is still with it." The two men approached cautiously, their movements slow and deliberate. Ben looked wide-eyed, clearly intrigued by the strange report. Dave's expression was harder to read, focused, professional, assessing the situation. As they got closer, about 10 feet from the bush, Rusty tensed. He stopped pacing and faced them directly, lowering his body slightly, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He wasn't overtly aggressive like he had been towards the hawk, but he was clearly issuing a warning. "Don't come too close." "Easy there, fella," Dave murmured, his voice calm and even. He stopped, holding up a hand to halt Ben as well. "We see you. We're not here to hurt anyone." They stood still for a moment, allowing the cat to observe them. Then something remarkable happened. As Dave took another slow, careful step forward, Rusty didn't back away further or hiss. Instead, he looked directly at Dave, tilted his head slightly, and let out a distinct, soft mew. It was the same questioning, almost conversational sound Sarah had heard earlier. Then, astonishingly, Rusty took a tentative step towards Dave, rubbed briefly against the leg of his khaki trousers, a fleeting, shocking moment of contact, before immediately retreating several steps back towards the edge of the woods, where he sat down, still watching intently, but with his defensive posture visibly lessened towards the older man. Sarah and Ben exchanged stunned glances. Had that really just happened? The stray cat, who avoided all human contact, had seemingly recognized and acknowledged the senior keeper. It was a tiny interaction, lasting only seconds, but it felt hugely significant. It hinted at a history, a connection that Sarah couldn't fathom. Dave, however, didn't seem overly surprised, though a flicker of interest crossed his face. His focus shifted immediately to the ivy patch. "Okay, let's see our little escapee," he said quietly. He knelt down, moving with the practiced ease of someone who had handled countless nervous animals. Ben stood back, ready with a soft blanket and a small carrier. Dave gently parted the ivy. "Well, hello there, Pip," he murmured, his voice soft. "Caused quite a stir, haven't you?" He expertly scooped up the tiny, trembling monkey. Seen clearly now, it was indeed a baby marmoset, looking terrified but unharmed. Dave cradled it gently against his chest, speaking in low, soothing tones. "There now, you're safe. Let's get you back to Maya." This was the turning point. The immediate crisis of the monkey being lost and vulnerable was over. It was safe in experienced hands. But the mystery had deepened. Rusty's unexpected interaction with Dave opened up a new set of questions. This wasn't just a random stray cat exhibiting unusual compassion. There was clearly more to the story, a connection waiting to be revealed. The focus shifted from the simple rescue to understanding the surprising relationship that had unfolded in Sarah's backyard. The ordinary stray cat had become an enigma, and Sarah felt an intense need to know the truth behind his actions. As Dave expertly settled the trembling Pip into the soft blanket Ben held out, Sarah approached the two rescuers, her mind buzzing with questions. "He seems all right," she asked tentatively. "A bit cold and very scared, but looks okay physically," Dave confirmed, gently tucking the blanket around the tiny monkey. "We'll get him checked out properly back at the sanctuary, make sure he gets fluids and warmth. He's a tough little guy, but lucky someone found him." "It wasn't just me," Sarah said quickly. "It was the cat. Rusty, that's what I call him. He was here when I came out, pacing and meowing, and I saw him scare off a hawk that was circling overhead. He stood right over Pip." She gestured towards the ivy patch. Ben's eyes widened further. "Seriously? An orange stray? That's incredible. I've heard stories, but—" Dave, however, was looking thoughtfully towards the edge of the woods where Rusty, or Cheeto, as perhaps he was known here, sat watching them, a silent orange statue in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. "An orange cat, you say?" he asked, turning back to Sarah, his gaze sharp and focused. "Medium-sized, maybe a little thin, with a distinctive small nick, a little tear in the top of his left ear?" Sarah nodded, surprised by the specific detail. "Yes, that's him exactly. How did you know?" A faint smile touched Dave's lips. "Ah," he said, a note of recognition in his voice. "Well, maybe incredible isn't quite the right word, though it's certainly remarkable. We know that cat, or at least we used to. Called him Cheeto back then because of the color. He paused, looking back towards the woods again as if confirming the cat was still there. He started showing up around the sanctuary maybe 2-3 years ago. Never let anyone get too close, typical stray behavior, but he had a peculiar habit. He used to spend hours hanging around the fence line of the primate enclosures, especially near the marmoset and tamarin habitats where Pip's mother, Maya, lives. Ben looked surprised. Cheeto? I remember seeing an orange cat sometimes, but I didn't know he had a name or that he watched the monkeys. Yeah, Dave continued, his gaze distant for a moment, remembering. We all noticed him. We figured he was just curious, or maybe hoping the monkeys would drop some fruit near the fence. They can be messy eaters. We kept an eye on him, made sure he wasn't causing any trouble or getting too close, but he never did. Just watched, especially Maya. She's quite calm, used to sit near the fence sometimes, and he'd just sit on the other side, watching her with Pip when Pip was first born. He shook his head slightly, a look of wonder on his face. We haven't seen much of him the past few months, maybe 6 months or so. Thought he'd finally moved on, found a better territory perhaps. Never imagined. He trailed off, looking back at Sarah. Never imagined he'd formed enough of a bond or whatever it is to actively protect her baby when he found him lost and alone. Maybe all that watching wasn't just idle curiosity. This was the truth that surprised everyone. The stray cat wasn't a random stranger acting out of inexplicable kindness. He had a history, a previously observed connection, however misunderstood, with this specific monkey family. His fierce protection wasn't just a defense of a random vulnerable creature, it was a defense of Pip, the offspring of the monkey he had spent hours quietly observing. The depth of that silent connection, the loyalty shown by a creature assumed to be entirely self-interested and detached, was the truly astonishing revelation. So, his behavior towards me, Dave mused, glancing at his trouser leg where Rusty had briefly rubbed. Maybe he recognized my scent from working near the enclosures all the time. Or maybe it was just his way of saying, okay, I trust you to take it from here. The plan now was simple: get Pip back to the warmth and safety of the sanctuary and reunite him with his anxious mother. Dave carefully placed the blanket-wrapped Pip into the small carrier Ben held open. Thank you again, Mrs. Albright, Dave said sincerely, for calling us and for letting Cheeto do his thing. Rusty remained seated at the edge of the woods, watching as the two men prepared to leave. He made no further sound, no further move towards them, his duty seemingly done. He was once again the silent observer, the wild creature on the periphery. But now, Sarah saw him not just as Rusty the stray, but as Cheeto the guardian, a creature with a hidden history and a surprising capacity for connection. The final act of the drama was Pip's safe return, but the resonance of Cheeto's actions lingered powerfully in the quiet garden air. With Pip secured safely in the carrier, Dave gave Sarah a final nod of thanks. We'll let you know how he settles back in, he promised. Ben, still looking slightly awestruck by the whole event, offered a grateful smile. They turned and headed back towards the side gate, moving quietly but efficiently. Just before they disappeared through the gate, Rusty Cheeto let out one last, soft meow, not directed at them this time perhaps, but more like a sigh, a release of tension now that the small monkey was being taken to safety. Then, True to his stray nature, he turned and melted silently into the deeper shadows of the woods bordering the sanctuary, vanishing as quickly as he often appeared. Sarah stood alone on her lawn, the only sounds now the familiar evening calls of crickets starting up, and the distant reassuring hum of normalcy returning. The tiny exotic creature was gone, rescued. The immediate crisis was over. The central question, what was happening in the ivy, had been answered in the most unexpected way. Pip was safe. Sarah walked slowly back towards her house as twilight deepened, her mind replaying the events of the last hour. The initial confusion, the shock of finding Pip, the tension of the hawk's appearance, Rusty's fierce defense, the surprising interaction with Dave, and the final revelation of the cat's hidden history. It felt like something out of a storybook, not her quiet suburban life. The truth hadn't just been that the monkey was lost. It was the complex, hidden compassion of the stray cat that truly astonished. Later that evening, Dave called as promised. "Pip is doing fine, Mrs." "All right," he reported cheerfully. "A little dehydrated, but warming up nicely." Maya recognized him instantly. "Quite a reunion. We're very grateful for your call and for Cheeto's intervention. Still can't quite get over that." Sarah felt a wave of relief and warmth. She thanked Dave again, glad to know the little monkey was safe and sound, back with his mother. After hanging up, she found herself looking out the kitchen window towards the dark woods. Cheeto, Rusty, was out there somewhere. She couldn't just forget him now, knowing what she knew. Before locking up for the night, she did something she hadn't done before. She put out a small bowl of fresh water and a plate with a generous helping of leftover roasted chicken on her back patio, near the edge of the garden where he might feel safe approaching under the cover of darkness. It felt like the least she could do for the small, brave guardian. The next morning, the plate was clean and the water level was lower. Sarah smiled. It was a start. Over the following weeks, Sarah continued to leave out food and water regularly. She didn't see Rusty Cheeto every day, but his appearances became more frequent, less fleeting. He remained wary, never allowing her to get too close, but he no longer bolted instantly at the sight of her. Sometimes she'd see him just sitting in a patch of sunlight in her garden, grooming himself, seemingly more relaxed, more trusting of this particular space. He never came inside, never sought affection, but a quiet understanding seemed to pass between the retired librarian and the enigmatic orange stray. Sarah's life hadn't been entirely lonely before, but witnessing the events of that afternoon had filled a quiet corner of her heart. It was a potent reminder that connections could be forged in the most unexpected ways, that courage and compassion weren't solely human traits, and that even a creature living on the fringes could possess a depth of loyalty and feeling that could surprise everyone. Her garden felt different now, charged with the memory of that strange, heart-warming encounter, forever changed by the day the stray cat did the unthinkable for a lost baby monkey. They left the cat tied to a pole in the heat, but a stranger's decision changed everything. Could a cat left for dead in the scorching desert sun be the key to unlocking a decade of buried family secrets and a desperate man's last hope? You'll be astonished when you learn that Rusty the yellow-striped cat doesn't just mend a broken heart, but uncovers a truth about his rescuer's past that changes everything, leading to a discovery no one saw coming. don't miss this incredible journey of loyalty and fate. Subscribe, like this story, and listen to the full, unbelievable tale now. The air in the narrow Tucson alley hung thick, still shimmering above the asphalt like a malevolent spirit. Sometime past noon, in the brutal Arizona July, the sun beat down with pitiless intensity. A thin, ragged rope, no thicker than a finger, bit into the matted, orange-yellow fur of a young cat. It was tied fast to a scarred wooden power pole, the knot pulled cruelly tight. Sweat plastered the cat's fur to its slender frame, now caked with the ubiquitous red dust of the desert. Its blue eyes, usually vibrant, were dull with a desperate thirst, a clouded film settling over them. A dry, cracked pink tongue lolled from its mouth, and each breath was a shallow, hitching gasp against the 105-degree inferno. Its paws, raw and blistered from the scorching ground, twitched feebly. A faint, almost inaudible meow escaped its throat, a sound swallowed by the oppressive heat and the distant, indifferent hum of city traffic. The only other noise was the rhythmic groan of an overburdened air conditioning unit from a nearby auto parts store, its fan doing little to stir the suffocating air. The cat, no more than 2 years old, had no water, no shade, no escape. It was a portrait of deliberate, slow, baking cruelty. The street shimmered, the cat's head drooped, its faint cries ceased. For a long moment, the only movement was the almost imperceptible rise and fall of its dust-caked ribs. Then a shadow fell across it, a shape dark against the blinding glare of the alley wall. Frank Davis, 60 years old and moving with the weariness of a man carrying more than just his lunch pail, shuffled down the alley, his usual shortcut home from Frank's Auto Repair, a business that felt more like a dwindling obligation than a source of pride these days. His pale blue chambray shirt was a roadmap of sweat stains clinging uncomfortably to his back, and his silver hair lay damp and disheveled against his temples. His face, etched with the lines of solitary grief, was haggard. It had been 5 years since Margaret, his wife, had succumbed to a swift and merciless cancer, and the silence in their small Tucson apartment had only grown louder with each passing year. Their daughter Lily was a ghost in his life, a vibrant, rebellious spirit who had vanished a decade ago after a bitter argument. Frank, a man of rigid principles and old-fashioned sensibilities, had vehemently opposed Lily's freewheeling lifestyle, her choices clashing with everything he believed in. The words exchanged that day had been harsh, unforgiving, and Lily, then a fiery 20-year-old, had walked out, leaving a chasm of unspoken regret that Frank hadn't known how to bridge. He'd heard nothing since Frank's apartment. A couple of blocks from the garage was a testament to his current existence. Functional, tidy, but devoid of warmth. Faded yellow walls seemed to absorb the light. A worn floral sofa, Margaret's favorite, bore the ghostly indentations of her presence, a space he subconsciously avoided. The faint, pervasive scent of motor oil and old coffee clung to the air, a smell he no longer noticed. His routine was an exercise in monotony. Open the garage fix. What cars came in, fewer each year, eat a solitary dinner from a can or the microwave, watch the flickering images on the television without really seeing them, and then fall into a restless sleep, often punctuated by dreams of Margaret's smile or Lily's defiant laughter. Tucson in the summer was a city hunkered down against the heat. Life moved slower. Transactions were briefer, and the desert landscape that ringed the city seemed to encroach its arid breath, a constant reminder of nature's indifference. He knew his neighbors by sight, a polite nod exchanged in the laundry room or by the mailboxes, but connections were superficial, fleeting. Loneliness was a familiar cloak, heavy and insulating. He sometimes thought of Margaret's cat Muffin, a fluffy Persian who used to knead his lap in the evenings. The thought brought a pang, a memory of a softer, more connected time. He hadn't considered another pet. The responsibility, the potential for another loss felt like too much to bear. His world was small, contained, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, shrinking. He was a man waiting, though, for what he couldn't have said. It was the faintest of sounds, a mewl so weak it was almost carried away by the sigh of the wind funneling down the alley that pierced Frank's heat-induced stupor. He stopped squinting against the sun's glare, reflecting off a discarded beer can. There at the base of the power pole was a small slumped shape. He moved closer, his heart giving an unexpected, painful lurch. The cat, tied abandoned, a surge of something hot and unfamiliar, anger perhaps, or a sudden sharp empathy, cut through his weariness. He remembered Muffin, how Margaret had fussed over her, the soft weight of her on the bed. Without a second thought, almost as if on autopilot, Frank knelt, the movement stiff and awkward. His hand calloused and usually steady, trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket for the worn Swiss Army knife he always carried. He flipped open the blade and with a quick, decisive slash severed the frayed rope. It fell away, landing with a soft thud on the scorching asphalt. He had a half-empty bottle of water in his lunch pail. He unscrewed the cap, poured a little into his cupped palm, and gently brought it to the cat's muzzle. The animal was nearly unresponsive, but at the scent of moisture, its dull blue eyes flickered. A parched tongue, impossibly dry, rasped against his skin, lapping weakly at the water. Frank patiently refilled his palm several times, the cat drinking with a desperate urgency that tightened his chest. Slowly, a spark of life returned to its eyes. It tried to lift its head, managed a shaky, uncoordinated movement. Frank, his task done, stood up intending to leave. He'd done what he could, but the cat, instead of bolting into the relative cool of the shadows, let out another soft, quavering meow, and with surprising effort rubbed its dusty, sweat-matted side against the leg of his faded jeans. Frank hesitated. He looked down at the creature, its orange-yellow fur now streaked with grime, and the damp patches where he'd spilled water. As he reached down to give it a tentative pat, his fingers brushed against something small and hard beneath its neck. A collar. It was a simple worn blue fabric collar, and dangling from it was a small tarnished silver pendant. He squinted, trying to make out the engraving, Sonny 12. It read, the name Sonny, snagged at a distant, hazy memory. Lily mentioned a cat named Sonny, once a stray she'd taken in during that tumultuous period before she left. He couldn't be sure. Those memories were a painful blur. He hadn't planned this. He didn't want a pet. He didn't need the complication, the reminder of things lost. But looking at the small, tenacious creature at his feet, a creature someone had deemed disposable, a flicker of something other than obligation stirred within him. Maybe it was the name, maybe it was the faint echo of Lily's long-lost voice, or maybe it was just the simple, undeniable fact of a life saved, a life now tentatively reaching out to him. All right then. Frank muttered more to himself than the cat. "Come on." He carefully scooped up the surprisingly light animal. It was too weak to struggle, offering only a faint rumbling purr that vibrated against his chest. He started the walk back to his silent apartment, the cat an unexpected warm weight in his arms. He didn't know it then, but the frayed end of that rope in the alley was an unraveling thread that would lead him back to a life he thought was lost forever. His initial goal was simple: get the cat some proper food and water, a safe place to recover. He didn't think beyond the next few hours, but as he walked, a strange mix of apprehension and a nascent, unfamiliar hope began to bloom in the barren landscape of his heart. He named him Rusty for his color and the dusty alley where their paths had crossed. Rusty, as Frank now called him, adapted to the small apartment with surprising speed. The initial days were spent mostly sleeping, curled up on an old towel Frank had placed in a cardboard box. Frank bought cat food, a litter box, and a small feathery toy that Rusty, once his strength returned, would bat at with a flash of playful energy. The orange-yellow fur, meticulously cleaned by Rusty's own tongue and supplemented by Frank's hesitant brushings, began to regain its sheen. The oppressive silence of the apartment was now punctuated by the soft patting of paws, the occasional inquisitive meow, and the rhythmic, comforting sound of Rusty's purr. When Frank would, with increasing frequency, find himself stroking the cat as he read the evening paper, Rusty was an explorer. The broken window screen in the small kitchen, a repair Frank had put off for months, became an irresistible lure. The backyard, a patch of packed red earth, a few tenacious weeds, and a gnarled ancient saguaro cactus became Rusty's domain. Frank would often find him there, basking in a patch of morning sun or intently stalking a lizard one sweltering Saturday afternoon. About a month after Rusty's arrival, Frank was trying to make sense of a complicated carburetor diagram when he became aware of an insistent scratching and a series of loud, demanding meows from the back door. Annoyed at the interruption, but also vaguely curious, Rusty usually just slipped out the window. Frank got up and followed the sound. He found Rusty in the backyard, digging with a frantic intensity at the base of the old saguaro. Dust flew his small claws, working like pistons, kicking back sprays of dry earth. Frank watched for a moment, a reluctant smile playing on his lips. Then Rusty's digging produced a dull thud. The cat backed off, meowing triumphantly, looking up at Frank. Peeking out from the disturbed soil was the corner of something dark and wooden. Frank knelt, his curiosity piqued. He brushed away the remaining dirt, revealing a small old wooden box, no bigger than a shoebox, for a child's shoes. It was bound with tarnished brass, and the wood was dark and weathered, a faint, almost obliterated floral pattern carved into its lid. The hinges creaked in protest as he carefully pried it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a stack of letters. The paper yellowed with age, tied with a brittle red silk ribbon. Beneath them was a photograph, colors muted by time, of a young woman with long, dark brown hair. Her smile radiant, her arms around a yellow-striped cat that looked remarkably like a younger, healthier Rusty. Frank's breath caught in his throat. The girl in the photo was Lily, his Lily, and the cat, it had to be Sunny. His hands trembled as he picked up the topmost letter. The handwriting was messy, slanting unmistakably. Lily's dad. It began, "I don't know if you'll ever see this. I wish I knew how to tell you. I'm sorry, I just wanted you to understand." Tears welled in Frank's eyes, blurring the words. He sank back on his heels, the desert sun beating down on his head, the letters clutched in his hand. Rusty wound around his ankles, purring, oblivious to the emotional storm he had just unearthed. Frank began to read letter by painful letter. They painted a stark, heartbreaking picture of Lily's life after she left her struggles with loneliness, bad choices, the crushing weight of addiction, and a deep, aching longing for the father. She felt she had failed. Several letters mentioned Sonny, her only real friend, her anchor in the storm, the silver pendant on Rusty's collar, Sonny 12, suddenly blazed with significance in Frank's mind. This couldn't be a coincidence. Rusty wasn't just like Sonny. There had to be a connection. The year 12, Lily would have been 22 then. Was it possible? Could Rusty be Sonny's offspring? The thought was a wild, improbable leap, yet it felt undeniably right. A new urgent purpose began to crystallize in Frank's mind. He had to find Lily. He had to know if she was okay. The letters were old, the addresses on the envelopes faded and likely long out of date. The trail was 10 years cold. He started with the most recent postmarks towns in Arizona and one in Nevada. But they were just post office boxes. He tried calling old friends of Lily's whose numbers he still had, but most had lost touch years ago, their voices sympathetic but unhelpful. He spent hours at the local library scrolling through online databases, searching for any trace of her, any hint of her whereabouts. The task felt monumental, overwhelming. Each dead end, each unanswered inquiry was a fresh stab of frustration and despair. His initial hope began to fray. Yet every time he looked at Rusty patiently watching him from the windowsill or purring contentedly on his lap, that resolve solidified. The cat was more than a pet. He was a tangible link, a furry four-legged question mark that demanded an answer. The letters mentioned a particular coffee shop Lily used to frequent in a town called Prescott, 2 hours north. It was a slim chance, but it was something. Prescott was cooler than Tucson, nestled in the mountains, the air tasting of pine. Frank drove his old pickup Rusty in a carrier on the passenger seat, meowing intermittently, clearly unimpressed with vehicular travel. The coffee shop Lily had mentioned in her letters from 8 years ago, the grind was still there, remarkably unchanged. Frank sat for an hour, nursing a bitter coffee, showing Lily's photo to the barista and a couple of longtime patrons. Blank stares, sympathetic headshakes. No one remembered her. Disheartened, Frank was about to leave when an older woman clearing tables paused, looking at the photo more closely. "Lily? Yes, I think I remember a girl like that," she said slowly, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Sweet girl, but troubled. Used to come in with a pretty yellow cat, sometimes kept it in a little bag." Frank's heart leaped. "Sonny?" he asked. "That was its name. Yes, haven't seen her in years, though. Last I heard, she was having a real hard time. Said something about trying to get into a program over in Flagstaff. But that was ages ago." Flagstaff, another lead, albeit tenuous. Frank spent 2 fruitless days in Flagstaff, checking with shelters, community outreach programs, anything he could think of. Nothing. The trail felt colder than ever. He was sitting on a park bench, Rusty on a leash, exploring a patch of grass. The weight of failure pressing down on him. He thought about Margaret, how she'd always believed in second chances. He looked at Rusty, who, having found a particularly interesting beetle, was now batting it with intense concentration. What was he doing chasing ghosts on a whim, more out of a sense of needing to exhaust every possibility before giving up? he decided to visit the local animal shelter in Flagstaff. He wasn't expecting anything. He just asked rather vaguely if they had any records of a yellow-striped cat named Sunny, maybe surrendered or adopted out around 8 or 9 years ago by a young woman named Lily Davis. The shelter worker, a kind woman named Maria, with tired eyes, listened patiently. "That's a long time ago, sir. Records from back then? It's a long shot." But she agreed to look. Frank waited an hour, stretching into an eternity. Rusty, now asleep in his carrier. Finally, Maria returned, a dusty ledger in her hands and a look of surprise on her face. "Well, I'll be," she said, tapping a page. "Sunny female, tabby yellow stripes, surrendered by a Lily Davis, August 14th, 2016. She was very upset, said she couldn't care for her anymore, wanted her to go to a good home." Frank felt a pang of sorrow for Lily and for Sunny. Was she adopted? Frank asked, his voice tight. "Yes," Maria said, tracing a line with her finger. "Sunny had a litter of kittens here before she was spayed and adopted out a few months later. One of her kittens, a male orange-yellow tabby, was adopted by a family. Let me see. Yes, a family in Tucson." She looked up at Frank. "They left a forwarding address when they moved a couple of years after that, but it's just a P.O. box." Frank stared at her, the pieces clicking into place with an almost audible snap. "Was that kitten? Did they name him?" Maria flipped a page in a smaller, newer binder, cross-referencing microchip numbers and adoption papers. The adopting family initially called him Marmalade, but the intake form from when he was brought back in as a stray last month, yes, here it is. He was found tied to a pole. They called him John Doe -3 initially, but he had a collar, a blue one. Frank's breath hitched, with a pendant. Maria nodded slowly, her eyes wide with dawning realization. "Yes, engraved Sunny 12. We assumed it was the previous owner's cat's name and year of birth." She looked from the ledger to Rusty sleeping soundly in his carrier. That's him, isn't it, Rusty? He's Sunny's son." The world seemed to tilt for Frank. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a direct, undeniable lineage. Rusty, the abandoned cat he'd saved, was the son of Lily's beloved Sunny. It felt like a message, a sign so profound it stole his breath. He wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. Rusty hadn't just dug up letters. He'd dug up a direct path. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he couldn't stop now. This was no longer just about finding Lily. It felt like fate, a thread woven through time and hardship, leading him forward. He had to find her for his sake, for her sake, and for the memory of Sunny now embodied in the little cat sleeping peacefully beside him. The search was no longer a desperate hope. It was a mission. The drive back to Tucson was a blur for Frank. The revelation at the Flagstaff shelter replayed endlessly in his mind. Rusty Sunny's son. It was almost too incredible to believe, yet the shelter records were undeniable. It felt as if Margaret from somewhere beyond had nudged events along, that Sunny herself had orchestrated this feline intervention. The weight of this knowledge was immense, shifting his despair into a focused, almost fervent resolve. Back in his apartment, Frank spread Lily's letters out on the kitchen table, rereading them with a new perspective. The mentions of Sunny now carried a deeper resonance. Lily's pain at giving her up her hope that Sunny would find a loving home. It was all there. He looked at Rusty, who was meticulously grooming himself on the back of the sofa, a miniature echo of the cat Lily had cherished. His new plan began to form more strategic now. The family who had adopted Rusty and then abandoned him were a dead end. The P.O. box the Flagstaff shelter had was likely long inactive, but Lily's letters spoke extensively of her battle with addiction, her repeated attempts to get clean. The shelter in Flagstaff had been near where she'd last mentioned trying to find help. If she had indeed entered a program, there might be a way to trace her respecting privacy, of course. Frank started researching addiction recovery networks and facilities in Arizona, focusing on those that might have been operating around the time Lily was in Flagstaff, or could have transferred patients. He learned about support groups for families of addicts, organizations that sometimes helped reconnect estranged loved ones if both parties consented. The internet, once a confusing maze, became a tool. He spent hours in the local library using their computers, painstakingly sending out carefully worded emails, making cautious phone calls. He explained his situation in broad terms: an estranged daughter. He was desperate to find concern for her well-being, the discovery of her cat's offspring acting as a catalyst. He encountered skepticism, bureaucratic walls, and well-meaning, but ultimately unhelpful advice. Privacy laws were stringent, and rightly so. But Frank persisted his story when he shared snippets of it. The cat, the letters, the years of silence sometimes struck a chord. One evening, a volunteer at a statewide addiction helpline listened patiently for nearly an hour. She couldn't offer direct information, but she told him about a non-profit organization that maintained a confidential registry for people in recovery who wished to be found by family and for families searching. It was a long shot, requiring Lily to have registered herself, but it was a concrete step. Frank filled out the online forms, his hand shaking as he typed Lily's name and date of birth. He uploaded a copy of the photo of Lily and Sonny. He wrote a short, heartfelt message assuring her of his love and his desire to reconnect, to apologize. He mentioned Rusty Sonny's son waiting for her. The personal stakes felt impossibly high. This wasn't just about assuaging his own guilt or loneliness anymore. It was about offering Lily a lifeline, a chance for healing for both of them. He thought of all the years wasted, the harsh words he could never take back, but also the love that had never truly died. Rusty was a constant purring reminder of that hope. He'd nap on the pile of Lily's letters as Frank worked, as if guarding their secrets and their promise. Days turned into weeks. Frank checked his email obsessively. Nothing. The hope, so fiercely reignited, began to dim once more. He started to wonder if he was on another fool's errand, if some things were just too broken to fix. Then, one Tuesday morning, an email appeared. The subject line was simple: "Regarding your inquiry, Lily Davis." Frank's heart hammered against his ribs. It was from the nonprofit registry. It stated that a person matching Lily's details had tentatively agreed to receive a message passed on through a third-party intermediary, a counselor at a facility. They couldn't confirm her location or any other details, only that his initial anonymized message had been delivered and she was considering a response. Another week of agonizing silence passed. Frank found himself talking to Rusty more than ever, verbalizing his fears, his hopes. The cat would just blink slowly occasionally, offering a comforting headbutt against his hand. Frank was on edge, jumping every time the phone rang, his sleep more fractured than ever. He felt suspended between a terrifying hope and a crushing dread. Finally, a second email arrived. This one was more direct. Ms. Davis has agreed to a facilitated contact. She is currently residing at the New Pathways Recovery Center in Phoenix. She is willing to meet with you if you still wish to. It included a contact number for her counselor to arrange the details. Phoenix, 2 hours away. Frank felt a wave of dizziness, a mixture of elation and sheer terror. He called the number immediately. The counselor, a calm professional woman named Sarah, explained that Lily was doing well in her long-term recovery program, but was understandably apprehensive. They agreed on a meeting for the following Saturday. Sarah suggested Frank come alone, initially. Frank hesitated, then asked, "Can I bring her cat? Or rather her old cat son? It's a long story, but he's the reason I found her." There was a pause. Then Sarah, her voice softening, said she would ask Lily. The next day, she called back. Lily was curious and said yes. The drive to Phoenix was the longest 2 hours of Frank's life. Rusty in his carrier was unusually quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the occasion. Frank's hands sweated on the steering wheel. What if she hated him? What if the damage was irreparable? He rehearsed apologies in his mind, but they all sounded hollow, inadequate. He clutched the small wooden box of Lily's letters on the seat beside Rusty's carrier. A talisman against his fear, New Pathways was a low, unassuming complex of buildings surrounded by desert landscaping. Frank parked, took a deep breath, and got Rusty's carrier. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, quiet. Sarah met him in the reception area, her smile kind. "Lily's in the family meeting room. She's nervous, Frank. Please, just be patient with her." Frank nodded, his throat too tight for words. Sarah led him down a corridor to a simple room with a couple of plastic chairs and a small wooden table. And there, standing by the window, her back to him, was a woman with short, light brown hair. She was thinner than he remembered, but it was her Lily. She turned slowly, her eyes, Margaret's eyes, wide and uncertain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air crackled with 10 years of silence, pain, and unspoken words. Frank felt as if he were standing on the edge of a precipice, the fate of his fractured family hanging in the balance. He could feel Rusty shifting in the carrier, a small, warm presence against the overwhelming weight of the moment. "Dad?" Lily's voice was a whisper, fragile as spun glass. She didn't move, her hands twisting together in front of her. Frank's carefully rehearsed words vanished. He could only nod, a lump forming in his throat. He gently placed Rusty's carrier on the floor and opened the door. Rusty stepped out cautiously, looked around the unfamiliar room. Then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, he walked directly towards Lily. He sniffed at her ankles, then rubbed against her leg, a soft rumbling purr starting in his chest. Lily gasped, her eyes filling with tears as she bent down. He looks just like Sonny." She choked out, her hand hovering over Rusty's orange-striped fur. "He is Lily." Frank said, his own voice thick with emotion. "He's Sonny's son. His name is Rusty." He quickly recounted the story, finding Rusty tied in the alley, the collar, the letters, the shelter in Flagstaff, the impossible connection. As he spoke, Lily sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face, burying her face in Rusty's soft fur. The cat pushed against her, meowing softly, licking at her tears. "Oh, Sonny," she wept. "I missed him so much. I had to give him up. I couldn't. I wasn't. I know, sweetheart. I know." Frank said, finally finding his voice, his own tears starting to fall. He knelt beside her, his hand tentatively reaching for her shoulder. "I read your letters. I'm so sorry, Lily, for everything, for not understanding, for not being there. Lily looked up, her face streaked with tears, but a flicker of something other than pain in her eyes. "I'm sorry too, Dad, for running away, for not reaching out." She touched the small silver pendant on Rusty's collar. "Sonny 12, she whispered. "That was the year I found him, my best year before everything fell apart. I put that on his collar, hoping whoever found him next would know he was special." Frank and Lily clung to each other, then the years of anger and misunderstanding dissolving in a shared flood of grief and forgiveness. Rusty purring contentedly between them, a furry living bridge across the chasm that had separated them. The little cat, driven by an instinct Frank would never fully comprehend, had not just found a home. He had brought a family back from the brink. The reunion was the first fragile step on a long road to healing. Lily was committed to her recovery, and Frank drove to Phoenix every weekend. Slowly, tentatively, they began to rebuild their relationship, sharing stories, regrets, and hopes for the future. After several months, Lily was ready to leave new pathways. She decided to return to Tucson to live with Frank, at least for a while. The small apartment, once a tomb of loneliness for Frank, began to fill with tentative laughter and the aroma of shared meals. Frank's auto repair was barely limping along. One evening, as Frank worried over a pile of bills, Lily, who had discovered a knack for baking during her recovery, suggested, "What if we started something new? Dad together." And so, Frank and Lily's Diner was born, a small, welcoming spot in a converted storefront not far from the apartment. Frank handled the grill, Lily managed the front, her warm smile and excellent coffee quickly making it a local favorite. Rusty, of course, became the unofficial mascot, often found sunning himself in the front window. But an old business loan Frank had taken out for the garage years ago. Its interest cruelly compounding resurfaced, threatening to swallow their new venture. Despair gnawed at Frank. He sat one evening in the quiet diner after closing Rusty curled on his lap, the foreclosure notice heavy on the table. Just then Rusty jumped down, meowing, insistently scratching at the back door that led to a tiny, neglected patch of dirt behind the diner, remarkably similar to the one behind Frank's apartment, complete with a struggling, half-dead ornamental cactus. Annoyed, but accustomed to Rusty's quirks, Frank let him out. Minutes later, Rusty was digging furiously under the cactus. Frank watched, a sense of déjà vu washing over him. This time, Rusty unearthed a small, badly rusted metal lozenge box. Heart pounding, Frank pried it open. Inside, nestled on faded cotton, was a gold ring, a woman's wedding band with a small diamond. Engraved faintly on the inside were the initials M.D., Margaret's ring. He'd thought it lost forever, slipped off years ago while she was gardening. Lily cried when she saw it. "Mom always said she had a lucky spot by a cactus," she whispered. She joked about cat luck, bringing good fortune. The ring, a forgotten treasure, was valuable enough to pay off the predatory loan and secure the diner's future. With the diner thriving, Frank and Lily, inspired by the cat who had changed everything, established Rusty's Rescue, a small foundation funded by a portion of the diner's profits. It helped local shelters and found homes for abandoned cats in Tucson. Their story inspiring others. Rusty lived out his days in blissful contentment, a beloved member of a healed family often found draped over the back of the sofa in their now warm and lively home. On Frank's desk, next to a framed photo of him and Lily smiling in front of their diner, sat another small frame, a picture of Rusty his blue eyes bright, the sunny 12 pendant, gleaming a constant reminder that sometimes the smallest creatures can bring the biggest miracles, and that even in the deepest heat of despair, a stranger's kindness can change everything.